Hello everybody. So we looked at how to create our first function, how to create callable functions, how to interact with callable functions from the Android application. Now, what if we want to interact with Firestore? Store stuff on the database. So basically, the user sends you some data and then you use it to store information on Firestore. So in order to do that, we need to import Firestore. So if you look at the example application that they have, they tell you to import admin, and also we would also, so basically just import admin. So that's the Firebase SDK to access Firestore. So basically you just need to import this here. Here it is. Save. No, so this means that we already have Firestore. And now, in order to be able to, if you look at the example that they have, let's say we create another function. Let's say we had this hello hi world function that we created. Let's create another one. Let's say call it add message, for example, right? Add message, right? And basically that is going to be the function that we're going to build, and it's a callable function. Here it is, add message. And then as you know that it is going to make some kind of asynchronous calls. So because what's going to happen is that I'd like to receive, let's say, some text message. So I'm going to receive some text message, and we're going to receive it like this. Let's say, or maybe there's a constant, say for example, the message, the msg.txt text equals data.msg.txt. So that's the message that we would like to store, and I'd like to store it on Firestore. So let's go to the project, make sure that the project has Firestore enabled, and Firebase demo, Firestore database, it's enabled already, and I would like to store a message under messages, and it should have created at the document ID to match the document ID, the message text, and the user ID, so txt. So basically it's going to be message text. That's what we'd like to store. And so basically in order to do that, we need to get access to a reference. So basically reference is very easy to get. All you need to do is get a document reference. So constant, okay, we'll call it, for example, doc reference, okay, equals admin dot, and then you say Firestore. Okay, that gives you access to Firestore. That is the instance of Firestore dot collection. And then what's the name of the collection? Let's say we're gonna call it messages, right? And then basically you say dot. You can indicate a specific document and give it also an ID, or you could say, for example, dot doc. And basically I don't know its ID, so basically I got a reference to some document ID, a new document ID. All right. So this is a new document. I don't have its reference, so it's like creating a reference, a new reference. Cool. So now I would like to the object that I would like to store. So basically the object, the new message. So basically there will be a new message that I would like to store, and that new message is going to be stored in this document reference. So document reference dot, I would like to set the message, right? So basically set, okay, and then in it I'm going to insert an object. So basically something like that. And this is going to actually store the object. So let's say, for example, I would like the document ID. So basically I would like to store the document ID, and the document ID, how do I get the document ID? It's from the reference, document reference dot ID. That gets you the document ID. That's the ID from the reference, right? And then I would like to store also the msg.txt to be the msg.txt, the one that I received from the data. And maybe I would like also to store who created it, right? So basically the user ID. So how do I get the user ID? UID. I would like to store the UID to be the context dot auth dot UID. Of course, you have to check to see if this user is authenticated or no, right? And for the time being, I will store also created at as new date, right? So basically, let's see if this would work. And there is a comma missing here, and save. So basically here it is. Now, the problem is that this call is an asynchronous call. So this is an asynchronous sync call, right? So basically, problem in JavaScript, when you're doing async calls, you can do it like this. You say const, this is the right result, equals await. Now, in order to do await, the function itself has to do async. So this is the function advertising that it has await calls. So we'll do async, await, this stores it, right? And then basically we just return a result. So basically we'll say return, for example, and I'm going to return just the document ID. The document ID, which is the document reference .id. That's what I'm going to return back. Okay, so that's very straightforward. This is writing something in the collection. Let me delete that collection so that you could see that this has been added. So here is messages, right, and delete. Now, how will I test this? I'm not going to deploy. Well, I'm going to use the shell. So basically, I'm going to use the shell. Right here it is. And in the shell, it's expecting me to send it message text. See? So this is the shell. The function is called add message, and then it's going to expect a message text. And the message text is let's say hello world. Here it is. And then I close the JSON and then close the function, press enter, and it actually did make a call, but it received an error. What is the error? Let's see. Firestore is not running, the emulator is not running, so calls to the function will not be in production. That's good. Then where is the error? So send this logging callable verification passed and is not running. Unhandled error, cannot read properties defined by UID. Okay, cool. So where is that here? Context.auth.uid. The problem is that the user is not authenticated, and you cannot test authentication when you are using when you're using the shell. So the shell doesn't allow you to authenticate. It might change in the future, but so in that case, the problem is that the user ID, in order to get the user ID, you have to use the app. So I don't want to do that. So what I could do is I could create a function, right? So basically I could do, let's say, I could create a function, right? So for example, I could say constant, let's say check auth, right? And check auth equals check auth. I'm just going to use the same very similar pattern. So this is check auth. I'm going to send you some stuff and it's going to return something here. So that's check auth. Okay, here it is. So the function is called check auth. Here it is. And basically what it's going to receive is and I'm going to create a variable here at the top. I'll call it, let's say const, and I'll call it debug equal false. Let's say it's equal to true. And then basically what I'm going to do is that the function is going to get the data and the context. All right, context, just so that it can figure out. Okay, then we say if you are debugging, right? If you are debugging, else you are doing something else. So basically what we want to do is that user authenticated or no, right? So basically return null if the user is not authenticated. That's what I'm going to do, right? So now if the user is not authenticated, I'm going to return null, right? Now what I'm going to do here is that if you are debugging, I'm going to expect the data to come, the user ID to come in the data. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do is that if data.uid, then return data.uid. In that case, it's going to return the user ID, right? And here we could check to see if the context.auth, if there is a context.auth, then return context.auth dot what do you call it, UID. Okay, cool. So now what we could do here is that before you run the app, right, before we run this app, what we can do is we can do a check to see. So we can basically, before the first line of the app, we could say, hey, what I would like to do is to check to see if this user is authenticated or no. So you say if check auth, right? If there is a check auth is not equal to null, this means this user is authenticated. Then else we do something else. So basically now if the user is authenticated, so if check auth, and then you need to pass it the parameters. So this check auth is what? Data context, right? If check auth data and context, then you can check to see, and you can see that check auth functions differently. If you are doing a debug, it expects the user ID to come in as in the data, otherwise it's the auth, okay? Now, what we're going to do is that if the user is check authentication, if the user is not equal to null, then we're going to do the stuff that we did here. Just copy this from here and paste it here, right? And save. Now else we can throw an exception. So basically what I could do is I could just throw an exception like this one here. Here is throw an exception saying that the user is not authenticated. Okay. And you always have to return something. So basically, let's say we return null or something like that. Here it is. If the user is not authenticated, right? So we need to return something at the end of the day, right? So now, why this is interesting and is good to do, because the problem is that in the shell you do not have access to authentication. You can't authenticate, right? So if we run again, let's run this again. Okay, I run the shell again. Here we are, and let's do the function that we called. Here it is. And the problem here is that this is not authenticated, and it's going to cause an exception again. See, boom, and it says the user is not authenticated, because we said that if we're going to call it, we're going to call it like this. We're going to call it like this, add message, and we're going to put the user ID as part of if we are debugging. Okay, so now let me get the user ID. Let's get a user ID authentication. I'll copy the user ID here and I'll paste it here, and that's how I'm going to call it. Okay, Control C, and I go back here. Now let me go to the Firestore database. It's still empty. There is nothing. The test one is just garbage. You just tst. Here it is. Now let's run the function. Here it is, and press enter, and then it's crashing for another reason. It says that the callable request verification passed. First is not running. Okay, that's good. And then unhandled type exception, cannot read the property called user ID on line 25, on line 50. So where is 50? Here. Okay, so now what are we doing? The debug is true. So now when we go up here, the debug is true. If debug, right? If you are debugging. Yeah. So the issue is that, you see, because there are two ways of getting the user ID. So basically what we can do is we could do this. Constant UID equals, and that's what this guy returns, right? So basically that's expected to have the user ID. And then we do the check to see if there is a user ID, if the user ID is not equal to null. And then if there is a user ID, we are here. So we just specify the user ID. Okay, because of the two different ways of getting the user ID. It's not always attached to the context. It's based on if you're using, I'll exit, and then I will run the shell again. And then I will paste, here it is, the, not this one. I need to paste the text here. Here it is. Okay. And enter, and you can see it did run, and I got a result. This result should be the document ID. So now when I go back here, I refresh here, and then the document ID is 36 and ends with an OH. This is the document ID here, and you can see that we added this information. All right, good. So now you can see that I'm able to add documents. You know, I can, if I run this function again, here it is. If I run the function again, it adds another document. You see here, there's another document getting added. If I run the function again, and so on, you see here it is. You have 3 now. Now if we do it again, and boom, you have 4, and so on. So it's straightforward, very straightforward. You are able to add documents, right? Now, what if I don't want to, let's say, I don't want it to hardwire the date and time to be the date and time from here. I just would like to specify the date and time, to store the date and time based on whatever is available on the server date and time, right? So basically that's what I would like to do, is to store the date and time based on the server date and time, right? So in order to do that, I need to specify how to store the date and time. So now let's see. So in order to do that, I'll go here. instead of just saying it's new date, I'd like to use, let's see if I can do this here, admin.firestore field value dot server timestamp, and we do something like that. I think this would work. So this one is going to be the date and time of the server, not the date and time of this cloud code system. So now let's do this exit, do this here, shell again, and then I'm going to copy this one here, paste it here, and enter. And then basically it's the E1 that starts with an X, ends with a D, X and D. And you could see here that the created time is the time on the server. Okay. So basically somebody could argue, yeah, you are already on the server because this code executes on the server anyway. But the right way to do it is this, is to use server's timestamp to indicate that you want to have the server timestamp. So that's how you test, right? How do you test authentication and so on? Because we needed the user ID in order to store the user ID here, so we need authentication. Let's say I would like to get the list of objects. So let's say, for example, I would like to get messages. Let's get messages, right? So basically, I would like to get all the messages, and I can do something like that to get the authentication, right? Done. Here it is. Now to get the messages. I'm going to do this. So basically to get the messages, you also have to get the reference. So basically let me not delete all the code. Some of the code might be interesting here. So here is the reference, right? admin.messages.get. And then basically I could do something like that. And that becomes the read result. So basically I'll do read, let's say read a result. And this is await. I'll do an await here. And basically this gets me, it's an asynchronous. So this is the asynchronous call. Here it is. This is the async call because you await. And then basically all of the stuff I don't need it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return back to you. I could check to see if there is a result. Right? I could do, say, for example, I could do, let's do a console.log read result just to give you an answer here. And I'm going to return null. Okay. Now I can do control, I do an exit like this, and then basically I'm gonna call this function like this. Here it is, and we are talking about get messages. So here is the function name is get messages, and then all I need to specify is just the user ID. I am going to get all the messages. Here it is, get messages. Go back here, press enter, and unknown attribute. So let's see, something is wrong. Let's have a look. Oh, sorry, have to run the shell and then basically run this function inside the shell, and then basically it's returning a lot of information, right? One of the stuff that is in the information is the data. So basically there's something called .data. If you look at this, is the whole result that comes back, but there's something called data. So basically what you could do is you could do console.data just to give you an idea, right? So this is data. Now when we run this again, just to give you an idea of when you run this, what you are going to get back. So here is get messages, here, boom. And it says that there is a problem, .data is not a function. So let's see, .docs, let's see. Docs. So docs is the documents. You know, if you look at the log, the previous log, there is something called docs. You see here, there is this query snapshot, and then there is docs, right? So it's just a function. So basically, we could run this and see what does docs do, right? You can always look at the manual, right? The manual will tell you exactly, or the documentation will tell you exactly what to do, right? So here we are. Run this here. And it's not happy for some reason. Let's see. So this await console.log result .docs is not a function. So basically it's not a function. So here we are. I think I thought it is a function, but anyhow, so we'll do back here control C or .exit, run it again, and I'm going to copy paste Perfect. So there is, it seems that docs is working. So I'm doing what? console.log.docs, right? So this is the docs. Okay. And then from docs, you can extract from it the data. So basically, you can loop over the docs and get the data. You know, you can do something like that. So basically what you could do is you can, if you need to iterate over each one of them, straightforward also. So what we could do is you could say, if, let's see, if result docs, right? Then what we could do is result docs for each, and then for each what? For each what we could do is for each, basically if you look at the result, if you just print this again, let's see, I just want to print this again because there's a lot of ways of doing this. So basically if we do this and save, you will see it's an array. So here it is, and again the shell, and I'll show you how to iterate over it. It's straightforward. We just for each loop, right? So we'll copy this here, and you will see that here it is, and this is the whole snapshot, right? And inside that snapshot there is a document. So basically once we do this, so maybe we can go back to what we had. So for each doc, we want to do something like that. So what we're doing here is that for each document, so basically these docs is an array, right? So if you look here, docs is an array. If you scroll down a little bit, docs is an array. See here? And for each document, we want to do something. So basically what we're going to do is I'm just going to maybe display to you console.log doc.data, get the data out of the document, right? And I'm going to remove this and save, again exit, and then do it again, get messages again, and then enter, and you will see that here it is. I'm able to retrieve each document, right? So basically what I could do is what I could do here is I could return, for example, in this scenario, I could say, for example, return request result.docs. Let's see what happens when you do that. If you return this, what happens, right? And remove the let's keep this, but then we were going to return this. So let's see. So it seems that when you do this, it's going to return a lot of things that we don't need. So you see here, it's returning the whole result, right? So what we could do is, instead of doing that, then we can have our results that we would like to return. So you could say let messages equal to an empty array. Here it is. And then basically here what we're going to do is when we loop, we just do messages dot push, and we put the document dot data here, and then what we're going to return is messages here. Okay, so that's what we are doing here. Now we do exit, and then we come back, and then we run it, and you will see that it's going to return an array of documents. Here it is, and basically you could see here it's an array of documents. See that? It's amazing. So basically what you received is the result, and it's an array of documents, right? So basically here we demonstrated that we're able to do this. We're able to get, you're also able to query. You can also have a query, dot query, you see here, dot get, or dot, you can add a query. You can look at the documentation for that, but we demonstrated here that's how you could do queries. All right, so please let us know if you have any questions.